And so you want to get to, we even talked about Jesus as being our focus. You want to get to the rapture.
Yeah.
And why that's unique. Why do we need to have a talk about the rapture? Because there is, I would say, in our culture now, it's kind of like a split. It seems, I don't know if it's 50-50. I don't know what the percentages are. But there are not very many churches, at least in my opinion, who really emphasize the rapture in church. There are some who, will talk about eschatology, they'll talk about the rapture, but not really as a point of emphasis as we do in Calvary chapels. So I'm going to point it back to you.
Well,
because you said you want to address this. Why do you think that is, Matt?
Well, I mean, there's this movement in eschatology to go back to the beginning of a movement that basically is Catholic eschatology. And it goes into Reformed theology in different places, and it gets into the church replacing Israel or Augustinian theology and replacement theology and all that stuff. And what I see, and by the way, Pastor Steve gave a Bible study at our ministry conference on this specific issue that Chuck brings up in his book about the view of the rapture, and I thought it was phenomenal. And so in the guys that I just mentioned, they kind of look at us as plebs, as like, not deep thinkers, and we're not organized in our theology. But I thought he executed that study just phenomenal to explain all the reasons why the rapture is important. But let me simplify it just in a very brief nutshell. Jesus said to be ready for his return at any time. And so it's called the doctrine of imminency. And there's an attitude towards his return for the church that gets us out of here that affects, in my opinion, our heart as believers in the way we approach the gospel, in the way we approach our purpose in serving Christ, and the expectant attitude that we have that he can return at any moment. And there's this branch away from that in church, in Christian theology, as far as a movement goes. If it's orthodox, I'm not even going to talk about that. But this branch away from that, and it's interesting that the Bible points out how in the end times there's going to be this lax in that area, in the exceeding return of Christ. And so we know the world, it's one of the common things in the world that they say, well, Jesus could come back anytime. You've been saying that for 2,000 years. And my grandmother was expecting Christ to return. And there's just this attitude that now you're starting to see denominations, whether they look at it like that or not. I get that they have their theological reasons for saying that based off Scripture. But the attitude, the heart towards that is deviating such a way that, in my opinion, when you read Scripture, is not good. And I think it warns against going that way. And so that's what I wanted to vet. What is your...
So I'll go back to the emphasis of the word, the priority of the word, because what I see when I read through the New Testament and all the writers is they really expect Jesus to return in their lifetime. And you can't deny it. You're going to, and this is just something, there's a handful of things that really I get takeaways as you read through the New Testament and study it. And that's one of the big emphases of Paul's writing, Peter's writing, John's writing. Like, these guys really believe Jesus is going to come back. And, 1 John chapter 4, John explains that we have this hope for the reason that it purifies us. We have this hope and it purifies us. And I think really that's ultimately what we want in our movement when we're talking about our emphasis of the rapture. It's not to make us doomsday preppers. It's not to get us, off onto, blood moon charts or, trying to, discern the sky or something. Our emphasis is we want to be ready for the return of Jesus because we believe the New Testament tells us we're to be ready. Jesus tells us we need to be ready. And to live in that kind of light, it purifies your faith. It encourages you to be on point with your ministry, your discipleship, your personal walk with the Lord, your evangelism, all these things, because you recognize if Jesus can return at any moment, then maybe my neighbor who doesn't know Jesus and I haven't talked to him needs to be saved and I need to say something. Maybe my son who's have a relationship that's broken, I need to restore it today. There's an emphasis of doing things here and now and not putting it off in expectation that it will get done eventually. And so that, again, the reason that's an emphasis among the Calvary Chapel movement is not our superior theology or eschatology. It really is to encourage us to, to stir us up in love and good works, and all those things that we've been talking about through these distinctives, the importance, the emphasis of the word, Jesus is the focus, the balance of fellowship, walking by faith. I think that, again, the rapture is kind of a natural outpouring of that doctrine and what it does, and encourages you to do those things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first got saved, to have a pre-trib, pre-mill, rapture, dispensationalist point of view, like it was, in the world that I lived in, it was commonplace. It wasn't something that was, unnormal, whatever. I'm seeing a deviation from that, where now dispensationalists is like, well, that's pretty weak theology. And to your point, there's an attitude going that way towards these things. And when you look at the end of the book and what God does with Israel specifically as a nation, and what the tribulation is about, and then God's wrath being poured out, all these things work together in the biblical point of view of the rapture. And I think you have to fit that in your theology. So I'll leave it at that. What else do you got? We're out of time.
Yep, we're good.